Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, and I am a data evangelist with Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Data Warehousing Capabilities, Deploying to Start the Business, Support the Business. I can read. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with my friend Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A section. If you would like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. To open the Q&A or the chat panel, you'll find the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. To answer the most commonly asked question, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within a couple of business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and we'll send a recording of this session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an acknowledged data management authority, is an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of DAMA International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 35 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in 30 countries. Among his 13 books are the first on CDOs, The Case for Data Leadership, the first describing the use of monetization of data for profit and good, the first on modern strategic data thinking. International recognition has resulted in an intensive schedule of events worldwide. Peter also hosts the longest running data management webinar series hosted here at dataversity.net, the very webinar you're in today. From 1999, before Google, before data was big, and before data science, he founded Data Blueprint, a consulting firm that helped more than 150 organizations leverage data for profit improvement, competitive advantage, and operational efficiencies. His latest venture is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn it over to my friend Peter to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome, Dr. Aiken.
Oh, Mark, it's good to talk to everybody. We have people from all around the world joining us today. It's really wonderful. And just a quick note, I'm here in Kansas City with the Kansas City DAMA chapter. So it's good to see everybody. Make a little bit of noise, everybody. There you go. All right, good. So again, pleasure to join everybody. Our topic today, obviously, is data warehousing capacity capabilities here. So let's jump right in. Again, a lot of slides here, and we'll try to get through them all. Program today is going to evolve around some definitions. Real important to have a good idea of what we're talking about. I'm going to talk specifically about what data warehousing is and has been. I'm in a room full of warehousing professionals here, so a lot of you guys know this, but a lot of you are still new to the topic. We'll look at the DMBOK guidance around that, and we'll talk about the role data warehouses play in terms of where everybody's going today, which is going digital. Then we're going to jump into some really two sort of parts of data warehousing. One is that data warehouses are either set up for integration or they're set up for preparation. And I'll walk you through each of those best pieces. Then we'll talk about best practices around here. And right about the top of the hour, as we come back, we'll look forward to your questions and answers and dive right into a hopefully real fun discussion, Mark, that we'll have in this area. So first thing to think about from a data warehousing perspective is sort of what I call the input outputs diagram, IPO diagram. Some of you may remember these, and typically we don't get them in college and university, which is kind of sad, but we'll maybe get into those topics a little bit later on. But we have data that goes into the data warehouse, and we have a diffuse group of applications that show up on the right-hand side of your screen there, different types of dashboards typically, or other types of uses. But the first thing to take away is that there is a tremendous amount of knowledge that occurs in this area that I've surrounded here, which most people call extract, transform, and load. There used to be a whole industry around that. Unfortunately, it has moved on as the rest of the industry has moved on. But there are all kinds of business rules and data quality rules in that part of your operation that are mostly overlooked. And it's real sad that when I have to come in and help your organization go to it, one of the things I go to first of all is let's take a look at what your ETL streams look like and see what's going on in there. Again, these are not even topics that are taught in most colleges and universities, which is, of course, why we have the DMBOK. We are in the process of starting to plan for DMBOK 3. Just a quick little announcement around that process. It took us 7 years to put this together in the form of a bake sale. We actually are going to be employing professional writers at this point, so we're looking for people that want to contribute to this. And if you do have an interest in contributing to this, I'll put Michelle Hebert's email in the follow up on this, so that when Mark sends you out the slides, you'll have a copy of that as well in order to do it. You can see that the warehousing part, though, is a entire piece of the DM BOK in there. There are 11 practice areas. This is considered to be one of the most important ones. We also, in the DMBOK, have an IPO diagram for each of the practice areas. This is the one for data warehousing and business intelligence, as it's called. You can see again on the outside, left-hand side, there's the inputs. In the green part of the activities. On the right-hand side are the outputs. At the top, we have the definition and the goals, and underneath we have participants and tools that are working within this. As I said before, many of you have lots of experience in these areas, and that's a wonderful thing, but a lot of other people are just coming to it for the first time. So let's do some definitions. Again, warehousing is a technology solution that supports query analysis, reporting, development of these types of capabilities. You might ask yourself, what else would you do? And there are lots of things in data that do this, but data warehousing is one that was developed specially for that particular topic. The idea here is to look at another set of analysis capabilities that most organizations don't have the opportunity to do. We've started to use the word still, and I should say started it. Actually, the term was invented the year before I was born, 1958. Goes back a long ways, where businesses are trying to get smarter about the whole process. And so the business intelligence label encompasses a bunch of different things that go together around all of this. But you may have a question like, well, what's going on historically with our data? Is it getting better, or are things getting worse? I've seen it defined as mathematics in business. Again, if you've gone through a business curriculum, you know that we don't do a lot of mathematics in there, but there is at least still some that gets us into that. This gets us into the topic of analytics, which is where most people go on this. And there's a lot of different aspects of it. Credit risk analysis. Some of you are in insurance. You've been doing these kinds of things for years and years. But what I'd like you to do is sort of take a step back from warehousing in general and say, not what data warehouse should we build, but how can these types of capabilities help our organization? Because as you've been in this business, one of the things we know is going to be sort of standard here is that things are going to change and evolve, and they do keep changing and evolving. That's one of the fun things about working in this field, that there's something new almost always happening as we go through this. And I put this next one up a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it is nevertheless still kind of relevant. Some of you may remember this scene from the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. Of course, what was in this particular box was the Ark of the Covenant. A little bit interesting piece on that, and it's getting stuck in a government warehouse somewhere. The metaphor, of course, is not lost on us. Most of the data that we have out there is not really accessed by our organizations. We can hopefully make the case that better organized data increases it in value. And if you have any doubt of that, just take a book and hand it to somebody and say, imagine trying to get the information out of this book without the benefit of a spine on the book, the page numbers on the book, the organization, the table of contents. All of these things help us find access to information in books. Warehouses serve exactly the same function for piles of data. But nevertheless, 80% of the data in organizations falls into the category of rot. Now, that's not very nice. Most people think, oh man, this guy's traveled a ways to come see us and he's calling our data rot. Well, rot's an acronym, stands for data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And the question comes up, okay, if 80% of it is redundant, obsolete, or trivial, which data should I eliminate? That's where I'm looking at a group of professionals here that can help out with that particular process in a way that most organizations aren't aware of. Here's one organization. This actually happened, a true story, not too far from here. The data warehouse that had 1.8 million members, 1.4 million providers. Sounds like a great deal if you work in that part of the country, doesn't it? You've got almost a physician for every person. But if 800,000 of them had no primary key, it meant the data that was in that field, of course, was inaccessible by them. We did another little bit of analysis and found out that almost 30% of them had no social security number that was maybe couldn't get access to who the provider was, even if we wanted to check their data and find out why we weren't linking in there. All sorts of other really interesting challenges around this, but the real bottom line here was pretty obvious. This entire data warehouse costing $30 million had one user. And of course, when the boss finally found out about this, said, I'm going to take the same business problem next time and put 5 MBAs in a room and lock the door until they figure it out. It'll be a whole lot cheaper than putting $30 million in it. Now, it's not that warehousing in general is bad or has any sort of wrong capabilities, but we are faced with a situation where most of our organizations have grown up over time with their own disparate piles of data. If you're fortunate enough to have an ERP, sometimes they're all together, but not always. And of course, what happens is we want to get data that goes from place A to place B and move these things around, get them back and forth. And now we have lots of interconnections, lots of integration that we've put together. If we had it to do all over again, we would design it completely differently, but we don't. We are always inheriting the legacy system that has come in the first place. And so people say, okay, great. So we should put a data warehouse in the middle here that'll help us to start pulling all of these things together. And we can pull the data into one place and call it organizational data instead of marketing data or payroll data or whatever it is that we're looking for. And that eventually, as we work our way through it, we can now start to connect our various bits and pieces. This is, of course, nirvana for data people. This is what we'd like to have, but it's not an easy task to get there. And again, some of you have been on various aspects of the journey. Some of you have made the entire journey around there. It becomes very difficult because it's kind of like building an airplane when the airplane's already flying. And that's a metaphor that we use a lot in this environment here. You'll see some things that are happening out there in the world that are seen as wonderful silver bullet solutions. There, of course, I learned from Clive Finkelstein that the only silver bullet is to know that there is no such thing as a silver bullet. But these things are worth looking at, and they are mature enough to the point where if you've any worked with linked data, it's a noun, verb, noun set of combination of a certain type of data that we can do things automatically with it. They have all sorts of freeware, shared services, things that can be provided. The one I'm showing here as an example was a creation that was done for, I believe, the US Department of Energy, where again, they had put somewhere on the order of $30 million into it and didn't have anybody that was using it successfully. And another group came in and said, well, if this is all you're trying to do, they created the entire warehouse for less than $300,000 and had a super, super big win out of it. Now, again, it's not always going to be that easy. We also have, whoops, one slide too far. We also have lots of different types of things. This is virtualization. This is the type of thing that happens in the cloud that you can do very easily now. And cloud is a really wonderful way to do. In fact, if you're not looking at cloud capabilities, I'm really surprised because almost every cloud vendor has been able to get their nose under the tent and get things started in these areas. Again, these are just some examples of technologies that can do some things really well. What you should be looking for as professionals is ways in which what you're doing fits well within this environment, and you can leverage that environment to the degree that you possibly can. Cloud computing, again, you've all heard of the moniker on this. There's all sorts of things that people are working on, gives you the ability to virtualize these types of topics, and that the cloud scalability is a thing that's a real advantage here. The only real problem with all of this is that many organizations went and sold cloud computing to management as cloud computing is practically free. And that sounds wonderful. And there's a lot of different options. Again, many of you are working with sort of mixed environments where it's partly cloud, partly private. Scalability is a true wonderful piece on this. And there's lots of things that are going on, but the number one problem on CEO's registry right now is my cloud bill is out of control. And the fact that it's on a CEO radar tells you how out of control it should be, because of course the CIO or the chief data officer should be the one that's actually managing those costs. And the fact that it has gotten beyond them shows that we've really made an overcorrection in that area. And it's not anything new. Anybody remember outsourcing, right? We're going to move all our stuff offshore and it'll be faster, better, and cheaper. And then we eventually brought a bunch of it back onshore. Some parts of offshoring are working well. Some parts of cloud are working well. But the fact that this is the number one problem of CEOs in today's environment tells us there's a major opportunity here for us to go in and help out. Now, let's talk about it from a warehousing perspective here. First of all, data in the cloud, whether it's a warehouse or just cloud-based data in general, I think should have three attributes that data outside the cloud does not have. The first one is that data inside the cloud should be cleaner than data outside the cloud. If you have trouble getting people to buy into that, flip it around for them and say, would you want the data in the cloud to be less clean than the data outside the cloud? And if they say, oh, yeah, that's what we like, you probably need to find yourself another job or go back to sleep, whatever the particular pieces on that. Cleaner is absolutely necessary, but it doesn't happen just automatically. And yet we have challenges around that. The second attribute is that data inside the cloud should be smaller in volume than data outside the cloud, as opposed to larger in volume. Bear with me for just a minute, because the third attribute hopefully will make it all clear. Data in the cloud should be by definition more shareable than data outside the cloud. The idea about these three particular pieces together is that by making warehouses successful, and I'm going to mix the words warehouse and cloud up here because they apply in both instances. What happens in most IT projects, and again, you're looking at somebody here who's been doing this work for 35 years and seeing organizations make mistakes. If you didn't go through this, feel yourselves extremely fortunate. But we get to the end of the project and we forklift the data in just the same way as we do everything else and say, we'll clean the data later. Well, probably not a good idea. And the real problems with forklifting the data is that there's no basis for decisions as to whether to include the data or not, that there is no inclusion of architectural or engineering concepts. We're simply taking existing tables and moving them back out into the cloud. Third, there's no idea that these concepts are even missing, because we don't teach them to IT students. We don't teach them to computer science students. We don't teach them to computer engineering students. So how would we expect them to know? And where else would they come to get this knowledge except to a DAMA chapter or to a Dataversity webinar in order to do this? Again, couple that with the fact that 80% of our data is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. We're making the cloud vendors very, very happy, but it's not really adding value to our organization. So what, of course, should we do? When we have the opportunity to move data into or out of the cloud, we should look at this as a transformation point. And the opportunity to have that transformation means that we can bring the data into some sort of a process and then move it out so that it is less in volume, it is cleaner, and it is by definition, and more importantly, architected to be more shareable. If we don't take the opportunity to try to make it more shareable, it won't be. But if we do take the opportunity to try and say, Group A is using this data and Group B is using 80% of it, can we do something to make it even more accessible to Group C and D, which aren't yet using it? The answer is yes. And again, the group of professionals that we have involved in these things are the ones that are doing it. The same lessons apply to cloud that apply to warehousing, because of course, much of cloud is warehousing out in the cloud in order to do this. It makes a lot of sense. And it also gives us an opportunity for something that the Chinese have gone very big on, which is called data branding. Now, that's just the idea that some of your data is of known quality, whereas most of your data, unfortunately, too much of it in many cases, is of unknown quality. So if you're putting data out there that has some attributes that you can count on, this gives you the opportunity for people to say, I don't want just any old data, I want this data. Okay, it's data that's in the golden triangle, as one company calls it that, or it's part of corporate data. Again, there's lots of different ways of doing it, but it gives them the opportunity to add branding to that. Because what happens if you just take your data and put it out there, it's kind of like working on a glove box, right? If you're trying to do the work and there's something icky on the other side of the glass, it's just not as easy to do it if you have it right in front of you. So this conversion from legacy into digital is all about this type of mistake, and most organizations have made it. It's just an unfortunate part of it, but the people who sign the contracts aren't really data literate, and that gives us real big challenges over there. The next component of this is to look at two different purposes for warehousing. The first one is integration. My payroll system wasn't built to integrate with my personnel system, so I need the two of them integrated, and a data warehouse is one way of looking at it. It's not the only way, and there's lots of other components of integration. If you've read the DIMBOK, you know that one of the pie wedges in the DIMBOK is in fact integration. So we talk about a number of different ways. But since most data is not organized in here, we often end up with the inputs being the same as the outputs. People just sort of, yes, I need to get this stuff in. And downstream knowledge is incorporated upstream if we do finally figure it out. Now, this is a process that is not as emphasized in data governance as perhaps it should be, but a data governance professional should not just know the data that's right in front of them, but also to know the provenance of that data, where it's coming from, and what are the subsequent uses of it down there, because we are, of course, all swimming in the same swimming pool in order to know that. The other part of a data warehousing piece, the second version, if you will, is it's the last mile of data preparation before data gets to decision-making activities. Sometimes the raw data isn't exactly what the decision makers need to have in order to do this. These can be more closed-ended activities. One of the ones I like to think about is, if you study McDonald's at all, you know that every once in a while they have a product that appears called a McRib. We don't know why sometimes the McRib shows up and sometimes it doesn't, but I'd like to think that McDonald's has some sort of strategic decision-making process involved in that, and that they use some form of data warehousing to help them figure that process out. That's just one of many, many type of examples. Again, you all have seen many more of these, but the key is you need to choose one of these approaches with your approach to warehousing, because only one of them really will give you the right results. In other words, if I'm going for integration, then orient my activities around integration. If I'm orienting my activities towards data preparation, orient them that way. Trying to do both at once is almost always a mistake that ends up with the data warehouse not being satisfactory in terms of what people are looking for. So we're going to take a look at the integration first, and then we'll take a look at the preparation pieces. From an integration perspective, if I were to give you guys a problem and say, how many interfaces are required to connect these 6 legacy applications up? Many of you are crossing your eyes and saying, yes, that's a bunch. There's actually a formula. It's n times n minus 1 divided by 2, which gives us the upward theoretic complexity as to how complex this possibly could be. The answer is between 1 and the upward theoretical complexity. Okay, interesting. So I'm allowed to use the Royal Bank of Canada's numbers for this example. It's one of those things that I love, being out and working with different groups. And they said, sure, you can use ours. They have 200 major applications, when gave them about 5,000 batch interfaces in order to do that. All right. So the next question they wanted to know was, are they above average or below average? It turns out when you look at this, if I just take the numbers and put it in a logarithmic scale of 6, 60, and 600, at 600 legacy applications, there are 180,000 potential combinations. The answer is somewhere between 1 and 180,000 possible combinations. And the fact that they are here at 5,000 means they're probably not in too bad a shape. Now, 5,000 legacy interfaces to maintain sounds like guaranteed employment for everybody in the room here, right? Good stuff to be able to have. And everybody's okay saying they're probably below average, but could we do better? I think the answer is yes. And that's where value really comes in. If you haven't run across Claudia Imhoff's wonderful book called The Corporate Information Factory, Bill Inman, Claudia, and I can't read the last piece of the last author on there, but it's a really good book that says, look, this process of putting information into an integration format is something that we can do somewhat akin to a manufacturing piece. Engineers love this. Data engineers love it. They look at this and what they say is, what can I automate? How can I speed up the process? The idea is, of course, that stuff comes in on the left-hand side from applications. There's a reference app up at the top there that takes and helps to normalize. Again, normalize, probably not the right word. Maybe harmonize is a better word in order to do that. Bounces back against historical reference data, and then creates a series of data marks that are then used for analysis, exploration, operational analysis on the far end of it. Again, wonderful book. It's very inexpensive to get a used copy on Amazon and have it delivered to you overnight for their standard $3 delivery charge in order to do that. Here's a more detailed example. Again, this is a healthcare type thing. Again, eligibility claims data, EMR, LIMS, risk, all sorts of things go into the top. We pull it together in one place, and then we use it for a number of consistent dashboards. The basic format of this is what we call the Inman style database, or the third normal form database. Bill defines it as a subject-oriented, integrated, time-variant, non-volatile collection of summary and detailed historical data used to support the strategic decision-making of the organization. And we just had Bill doing a quick tour of our China chapters just last month over there. He is still cranking out stuff as vital as it is. If you haven't gotten into his most recent stuff, he's doing some really cool work in text analysis that's out there. And he's just as good as he was 30 years ago in terms of that. Some of us get slower as we get older. I think Bill gets faster. You can see what's happening on the left-hand side, though. We have a series of operational systems that are coming into a series of staging areas that we eventually put into a warehouse. And we take that warehouse and we put it in its most granular format. Now, most granular is code words for the normalization process that most of us had to go through at some point in college and university. And that from there, we create a series of data marts that now take that general corporate data and make it really useful for the purchasing organization, really useful for the sales organization, and really useful for inventory management in this example. You're the ones that would decide what would be useful for your example. And then from there, we can tie the various reporting and analysis capabilities to the other side of it. When we talk to third normal form, again, the idea here is that every attribute in the relationship is a fact about a key. And that allows us to dive in and give us data that is much more granular. The problem, I'll say it's a challenge rather than a problem, is that in my experience, the vast majority of our students that have gone through this in college and university went through it with an instructor that was less than fully qualified to explain these details to them. And they come out more confused than not. And so when you tell them, I'd like this normalized, they kind of look at you and say, are you sure? Because I never really figured out what we were doing that for there in the first place there. And there's no real IT context on it. The goals, of course, of normalization are data analysis. And once we understand what the data does, then we denormalize the data so that we can implement things that are production ready, because normalized data is, of course, much slower to process than stuff that's not. But we know and understand those properties and we can live with them given that. So there's some pros and cons in this. Again, most people kind of get the big data warehouse concept as an end user. There's one place to go. It gets you back to that branding thing. We say we're not going to have employee information maintained in the 13 places that the average corporation keeps their personnel information in around the organization. Joins in this context can be expensive, and scaling is a little bit of a challenge in this area. So I want to take a quick dive here and talk about the difference between architecture and engineering. Architects are, of course, needed to describe what it is that you'd like to have in the first place and to make sure that it's going to be sizable for you, that you can afford to do it and they can afford to build it for you. Engineers are required, though, because architects don't get down into the details. And the details are absolutely critically important because that's all data is a bunch of details that are in there. And the idea of attracting and retaining talent here is quite a challenge. Most organizations don't really know what they're hiring. Again, I take it up even to the level of a CDO. Imagine an organization trying to hire a chief data officer without talking to any of the data people in the organization, which seems to happen quite a bit. And CDOs are lasting about 18 months on the job these days. It's a tough position. We used to joke and say that CIO stood for career is over. They've now managed to mature the CIO career from 18 months to between 2 and 4 years, which is not a lot of success, especially when you consider that for similar size companies, the average chief financial officer who should be rotated out on a regular basis lasts 12 years compared to that. So lots and lots of challenges with acquiring talent in this area, but with the right talent, you can pull together all sorts of various things. Now, interestingly, this is a long time after the Target data breach. Some of you may remember it, may remember those good old days when Target, could look at a woman and decide whether she was pregnant or not by what she bought. I actually had a data scientist say that at a meeting one time. Target will deny this ever occurred if you go there on site today. So nope, that was just fake news, never happened, right? Well, no, I'm sorry, it was there. The individual did it. And Target actually had some good things that could come of this. One of the things that Walmart does is that they predict when economic impacts hit their environment, they predict what they should do with the price of baby formula to make sure that people don't take it and cut it in order to do that. Again, lots of different stories that go into there. But what we're seeing happen in most cases is an inordinate emphasis on the right-hand side of this diagram. We in the data management community tend to be on the left-hand side there, and then we hand it off. Sometimes we extend into that data warehousing piece, and we get to these diffuse applications that I put out before, but that the learning loop is only on the right-hand side of this diagram. It doesn't tend to go back into where the source systems are and fix the problems that are there, which is, of course, a much cheaper way of doing it than actually going around and playing whack-a-mole and correcting all the data quality problems that you have in there. I'll give you just one very specific example that I was very fortunate to be part of. The It's called Feeding America organization, literally have their offices opposite the Trump Tower. And they literally, the word Trump is what they look at every day. They said it gives them a little message, a little motivation to do that. And they're pretty good at making food, putting peanut butter and jellies out into the communities that need to have it on a regular basis. And their major donor said to them, here's some money, go out and figure out what else you could do with this data. We were just sort of astounded. Uh, Looked at a situation for a city where a bus route was normally called bus route Main Street because the bus went up and down Main Street. Seems pretty reasonable. But by simply rerouting the bus route a little bit, they were able to eliminate food deserts for thousands and thousands of families using the data that they had in their food that they had gotten from their data warehouse. They wouldn't have been able to do that if they hadn't gone through the integration process and come up with that sort of a thing. Again, a wonderful set of stories. They're continuing to work in that area and looking around and saying, wow, food banks and data, pretty interesting combination. And they came up with some really, really good things around all of that. Well, our second category then is this sort of data preparation piece. And you'll see these types of diagrams where they talk about all sorts of things, BI. Remember when analytics had predictive analytics and all sorts that were like 4 stages of analytics? I think most of that's disappeared now, hasn't it? I guess unless you go to the conferences, they still work on this. But it really all just falls into this general category of what are we trying to do? And basically, it's drill into these data warehouses or data marts. So the users can drill anywhere, the entire cube is accessible, and the transactions are starting out here at the gross level, and then you break them down into the detailed level. Again, the emphasis is on the cube. The idea is that there are n dimensions. I'm showing 3 here, products, time, and geography, but many of you work in multi-n dimensional warehouses that have lots and lots of these things. I might look at revenue for laptop computers in a particular example, or the revenue for all electronics, or the total costs and revenues at the top 10 stores that we're selling. These are interesting questions that the business is going to come to, and unless we provide them with the data that they need to have, they aren't going to be able to come up with it. A typical example here, sort of something that sounds like a little CSI example. There's 30,000 people on a list of customers that have income of less than $100,000 and they're less than 30 years in age. All right, great. So I've got 30,000 customers. I'm trying to segment that a little bit, maybe do an OLAP filter on top of it. And I want to know just the ones that live in New York City. Once again, chop the data at a certain point between the N's and the M's in order to do that. Oh, and who've purchased the product in the last 7 days. Okay, well, now I'm down from 6,000 customers to 800 customers. And then I want to go down into their purchased in the last 7 days, lived in New York, and what are the suppliers of those pieces? Well, that's where the cops get involved. They go around looking for a tire that looks like this pattern or a glove that was sold in this type of thing here. And they will go and interview those 40 suppliers. Now, where we get in trouble in IT is we try to make that last chunk something also that's automatable. Once again, you all as data professionals are the ones that know when we've gone too far, when it's not worthwhile to put additional effort into it, and when we should turn around and hand it to a group of detectives and say, go call all of these 40 suppliers and see if you can figure out which one of them had the potential challenge that was involved in the, again, murder CSI scene, right? Okay, something like that. Another example is portfolio analysis. We can cube by social status, geographic location, net value. But of course, we also want to make sure we avoid things that are immoral, illegal, and fattening, like redlining and all that sort of good stuff too. So we can put brakes and controls in there, and we could make our loan portfolio quite easy to do by only loaning money to people who are rich enough to pay it back to us. How much of a market would there be for that? Well, not as much, right? So there are lots of more customers that are not rich, again, so We have to figure out what the balance is around there. And there's different types of organizations. Again, if you've heard of Capital One, they got their start in the financial services industry by identifying a group of people who were underserved from a credit perspective, and they helped them rehabilitate their credit. That's one of the things that they as a corporation have done, is rehabilitate literally millions of Americans with credit who had credit that was stuck in a medical situation or a divorce situation or a separation of some kind, and had their credit ratings drop as a result of that. Well, this type of approach really requires what we call the Kimball approach to data warehousing. Again, same kind of thing. Left-hand side, these things come in, but instead of going in for a big data warehouse, what we do is we go straight to the marts in order to produce this. So we avoid that sort of bigger bottleneck of the integration data warehouse and instead move more directly to something that is useful. You will now see the things that are labeled in that third column called data products. Anybody get a revelation from that? Yes, it's the same thing, but it's a known set of characteristics about the data marts. And by the way, that's not the only things that are there. But what you're getting is the ability to go in and do something really quick. And of course, it's our good old familiar characteristic, the star schema. It's one of the things that students learn very quickly in university. If they're doing anything like this as a data scientist, they're taught enough SQL that they can get to a star schema on this. Again, they don't understand integration, normalization, or perhaps most importantly to you all, data munging, which is something that we really need to have them understand. That's the idea that data never shows up as perfect the way it does in all those classroom data sets that they get. And all those classroom data sets are perfect, right? It's just real easy. And then you show them what your data actually looks like, and they're going, what do I do with this, right? Well, once again, if they can get it in a star schema, they understand how they can put it in place. It's a fairly straightforward design, and most major database management systems are optimized for star schema designs. But that the questions must be built into the design of the system, and that these are fed only one fact at a time. So if you're looking at something other than sales, right, you have a different way of organizing the data, and then you get into some other types of things. Once again, same talent pool problem. There's not a lot of people that understand these solution designs that are coming out of colleges and universities. Instead, what people are doing is looking around and saying, oh, my competitor is doing pretty well in that area. Let me go hire their data people and bring them over into that. It can lead to some very interesting regional things that we've had occur in that area. Oh, and just real quick too, if you're looking at applications and you have a bunch of data scientists running around wanting to do machine learning, these data sets that are being set out there are absolutely really good stuff for them to focus on their machine learning. Most data scientists go in and they start off and they say, oh, I want some more data, and they want you to go buy more data and bring it into them. Point them to your existing data that you have in-house. They can learn a lot from it. It's already well understood, and there's a lot of things that are going on. But once again, we've got this sort of imbalance between what we're trying to do and what we're actually capable of doing. Even in spite of the fact that we've been cranking out data scientists now for almost 15 years, we're nowhere close to actually getting on top of the data problem. Although there is a little trick that'll come into that a little bit later on. Turns out the data that's available to AI is actually decreasing instead of increasing. That's kind of an interesting piece. We go into that maybe a little bit later on. So you're a manager, you want to do some data analysis, you've gone and hired the right kind of people. How much of their time should they spend munging the data, and how much of their time should they spend actually doing data analysis? Many people say 50%. Okay, seems like an awful lot at 50%, but the actual number is, in fact, we'd like to be there, but it's really there. Everybody understands this, everybody knows this, but we're not budgeting for it. We're not doing things that can, for example, taking a group of data analysts and adding a data engineer to them. One data engineer for every 10 data analysts can improve your productivity in the organization by a tremendous amount. And again, we all know this, right? I'm looking around the room and seeing heads nod, and I'm sure those of you that are out there on the other end of the webinar are nodding your head as well. Why is it that we're not budgeting accordingly to this? Why are we not addressing this type of problem here? And I'll give you my favorite example of this. During the pandemic, Forbes was looking at two airlines there, American and United. Again, both of them good airlines in there. And The airline, American Airlines, was valued at $6 billion in 2020, according to this Forbes article, but the data in their frequent flyer program was valued at $30 billion. United, very similar, $9 billion market value, $22 billion worth of data in there. Why hasn't somebody bought American Airlines for $6 billion and turned around and sold it right off to somebody else for $6 billion and kept all that $30 billion of data and how to make use out of it? Well, the answer is they can't figure out how to do it. They think there's value in there. But once again, I'm looking at a room full of people here who are really highly qualified to go in and add that kind of value and unlock literally tens of billions of dollars of value in your organizations by doing this. Another area that's hugely opportunistic for organizations is helping our knowledge workers do more. My definition of a knowledge worker is somebody who works with data. In other words, if I was making a data model, I would say all knowledge workers work with data, right? Seems pretty straightforward. It's we're using our head to make value for the organization instead of the muscles that we've used to do this. And yet, once again, when we ask organizations to incorporate data, many of them think that just cleaning the data is going to be good enough to do this. Hopefully this chart will change your mind on this. I want to highlight this is some really good research that came from a group called the Data Literacy Project. It's still out there. They've just done a refresh. I have not had a chance to go through and look at the refresh on it. This is a couple years old, but they did a great job. They interviewed thousands of people all around the world. They can cut and slice the data just exactly the way you'd like to, and probably go down and say, you know, what's happening here in Kansas City, right? As far as looking at the data, it's really, really good research. And yet, when we hand this better known branded quality data to employees, 48% of them make the gut decisions anyway and don't make a decision based on the data. Ouch. Everybody okay with that being an ouch? Well, it's even worse when we incorporate that to C-suite executives. 2/3 of them make their decision based on their gut, as opposed to using data involved in this. It's a terrible, terrible situation here. And even worse, when we look at what's happening in the knowledge area, 50% of them incorporate data and 36% of them find an alternate way to complete the task without using the data. This is cuckoo, right? And 14% of them ignore the problem entirely. Oh my goodness, what's going on here, right? Well, there's a couple of layers that you need to take a look at. There's a very young layer called a mobile data spreader. That's a person with an iPhone connected to the internet, and then an adult connected to the internet. And we can't really do anything about this. There's no laws that say in order to have a mobile phone, you must have this level of knowledge. But we can at least talk about from a behavioral and an ethical perspective, the main focus for those groups should be to avoid being fooled or manipulated and to be focused in on the individual level. It's a self-oriented piece. But when we get them as knowledge workers, and there's 1 billion knowledge workers around the world, we can now say, as a corporation, as an organization, we need you to sign a code of conduct here that says you will avoid fooling or manipulating, that your focus will be on the organization. That's something that we can put into our employment contracts. And everything in this sheet here should be required of data scientists and cyber professionals, which are almost completely unknown. These are some level 3 characteristics for people who are working with data out of data warehouses. One of the stories that I love to tell, actually witnessed this one time. I'm on the elevator with the data scientist and her boss. And the boss looks over and says, reading the name tag, hi, data scientist X, how's that project you're working on? And she turned around and said, oh, we're doing really well. We're up to 72%. And the boss exploded. His head went crazy, right? We're talking the eyes bulging, face red. We never do anything at this organization less than 100%. Get out of my sight and don't come back until you've got 100% for me, right? Okay, just clearly bad communication that occurred in there. But what we did find out was that there was actually at 65%, $5 million a year of additional revenue for the organization. The data scientist didn't have the business context to use that in that particular context, that people don't understand what data stewardship actually is all about. And it's the idea that we're taking data in a fiduciary relationship on behalf of somebody else, that we need to demonstrate value on a regular basis, that you need to stay current as well as the data staying current. This is, of course, the big problem with spreadsheets, is that somebody gets a spreadsheet and keeps using it and keeps using it and keeps using it, not realizing that if they need to refresh that data monthly, it's going to become problematic. And then last one is, we're in an area of shared fate. We're all swimming in the same swimming pool again. See, with all of these warehousing things, it's sort of been a case of build it and they will come, right? We're pretty good about celebrating when data things happen as data professionals, but we haven't been as good about understanding that when those data things happen, there's a corresponding organizational thing that happens. Faster, better, cheaper, or less risky is really what management cares about. And if we can get to that, we'll do a whole lot better, because all of these warehousing activities should be done in support of organizational strategy. And once again, organizational strategy is an interesting concept. We didn't even use the word before about the year 1950, when Peter Drucker discovered it and started writing management texts about it. So they turned this strategy into a very large document and a big, complex way of putting things together, which means that most people think about strategy as being a thing, a noun. The best way to think about strategy is to go back to the original military definition, which is a pattern in a stream of decisions. I'll show you a couple of quick examples on that, but you can see that now strategy is much more of a process than necessarily a noun in order to look at this. For example, Walmart's former business strategy, you all know this, everyday low price. They did a great job of making sure every associate, every customer, every vendor, every supplier understands this concept within Walmart. And when you build a data warehouse, you are building a data warehouse at Walmart for the specific purpose of helping customers get everyday low price. There are variations on this, of course, but that is what they do. Wayne Gretzky skates to where he thinks the puck will be. Again, really wonderful Wikipedia article out there on this particular piece. But if you're chasing a very dense piece of plastic around on the ice and it's faster than you, chasing the puck is not a good strategy if you want to be a winner in ice hockey. We take a military context. If the good guys are here on the left and the bad guys are on the right, we're going to use one strategy. If the good guys are up here on a hill and the bad guys are down there, we're going to use a different strategy. And if we're on the downside and the bad guys are up there, we're going to use yet a different strategy. So strategies need to change and evolve, hence the words, a pattern in a stream of decisions. And most importantly, strategy, formally or informally, is what guides work group activities. So a group of individuals sitting around at the organization trying to figure out what to do are going to do what they think strategy should focus in on. And again, your data strategy should be a high-level set of guidance that focuses on business goal achievement when faced with a stream of uncertainties around this. It tells how your data can most appropriately be applied to support the organizational strategy. And this usually involves a balance of remediation and proactive measures. I'm going to get to the remediation. Book number 14 is going to be on data debt, managing it. All right, so sort of heading towards the round bit. Last part of it is really thinking about reframing the question. Most organizations start with, how should we build this data warehouse, or what should go into it? What we want you to change it to is to, how can data warehousing capabilities solve this problem, whatever the problem happens to be? Now, don't go tear down your existing data warehouses that are out there. That'll get you in a lot of hot water really quickly. But the next time somebody comes along and says, let's put some data in the cloud and see if we can figure out, right, how can warehousing capabilities solve this type of problems? Another set of context around this is, how well are you exhibiting maturity with respect to your existing practices? There's a lot of organizations that have gotten really, really good at this, and that's wonderful. Let's learn from them. That's one of the purposes of DAMA, so that people can come to these meetings, learn about these sessions, or of course, got to put in a plug for DGIQ, which will be next month in DC. We'll be doing a lot of these types of sessions as well. Are you going to get it right the first time? Probably not. Most data warehouses are rebuilt 7 times before they actually provide business value. That's an awful lot of wasted piece. The main piece to emphasize there, the thing that will help most in most organizations, is having an agreed upon enterprise-wide vocabulary Not for everything, but certainly for the things that you're going to be focusing in on related to business strategy in order to do that. And do you have an auditable system of record? Right? Are you able to go back in and understand those extract, transform, and load requirements? How fast do you need the results? What is performance of inserts versus the performance of reads in terms of looking at various bits and pieces on all of that? Whenever I'm faced with a new word like analytics, I always go straight to the internet and I go to images.google.com. So I ask for analytics, and here's one that says it's 3. Here's one that says it's 4. Here's one that says it's 5. Here's one that says it's 6. Here's one that says it's 7. Here's one that says it's 8. What's the answer here? We don't know. I've never found anybody really good at defining the word analytics. And of course, we in the academic community do it so well. We start off with a big definition like this. This is a book they wanted me to teach from. And I went in and said, wait a minute, first of all, is there any other type of analytics besides business analytics? No, it's all analytics, right? All right. Information technology. What does that mean? Well, we're going to use hardware and software in order to do this. Statistical analysis, quantitative models, it's just models. Quantitative methods. Notice here what I'm doing is I'm boiling down all the academic BS that comes in this area. Help managers gain insight to make business, make better decisions. Everybody okay with that? Process of transforming data through analysis, insight into transforming data through analysis to solve business problems, supported by such tools as Excel and blah, 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 blah. So 1/3 of the original piece, and I think it says the same thing. The use of data, hardware, and software, quantitative methods and models to help managers make better decisions, the process of transforming data into actions through analysis to solve problems and tools. Once again, we teach this to the students, but we fail to teach them the business context. That's unfortunately, it falls to you all when you get them as hirees into your organization to do this. And the word really is just data analysis. There is no other meaning to the word analytics in order to do that. Analytics depends on understanding the ability to leverage architectures. There's lots of different architectures that organizations have. They're only useful if they're actually documented. If they're not documented, they're informally known in you guys' heads, but we need it to be shared by the business. We need to speak the same language that they have in terms of their actual systems pieces and the technical users in there. And if only when we have all 3 of those matching up, does it actually make sense and can be useful. It's this common vocabulary allowing us to do this. There's a third category of this. Some of you have heard of Data Vault. Again, very nice way of looking at this. This is actually now recognized by both Inman and Kimball as the best starting place. If you're building a brand new warehouse from scratch, do not go in and try to figure out whether it's going to be an integration warehouse or a preparation warehouse. Start off with it as a data vault. I know that seems completely heretical, but both Inman and Kimball agree with this statement in here. The data vault incorporates business rules that go along with it so that if you need to understand that the data that you were pulling in was something from the European Union before they put it out there as euros and everybody had a common currency and you need to maintain pesos and lira in there, it's a way of doing exactly that type of thing. It's a small amount of integration work up front that allows you to do a whole lot more and easily then move into one or both of the other 2 models that we've talked about. So here's a quick high-level comparison between the 2. But again, remember, the vault is the recommended starting point in all of this. Another thing to think about from a recommended starting point too is that there's lots of wonderful things. Most of you know Len Silverstone as a wonderful person who's been contributing to our community for a long time. If you don't have a copy of his 3-volume set, the Data Model Resource Book, you can still buy them out there with the CDs in the back, which means you get an Irwin model that pops out and says, wow, I've never had a pharmacy that ran on a cash business. Boom, he's got one of those right in there that you can pull out there. And they're used copies now, right? So they're not the $150 price, which is still well worthwhile to have in order to do that. Again, just having these models that you can put in place and start from. You don't need to start this as a scratch your head and where do we come up with a blank screen, if you will. Instead, there's lots and lots of these things. The object management group has got something called the Common Warehouse Meta Model that we can pull all of these bits and pieces from. So again, we're flying here, doing 120 slides in an hour. I know that violates all presentation principles as far as going through here, but what we've talked about are the definitions. What do we mean by warehousing? And again, think of it not as a thing, but as a capability in order to do this. That the DIMBOK guidance around this is actually quite good. And we'll show you the difference between a Inman model and a Kimball model. But remember, our starting point is the actual data vault piece that's on there. And that when people are trying to digitize your organization, which is on every one of your chief executive officers' goals and objectives, that they can't do it without data. And so that your data components are going to be an important piece in this legacy conversion environment that you're in. The integration pattern, if you will, we need to have certain engineering talent. It exists now in organizations, but it is not coming out of college and universities. You're having to train for that, which is unfortunate. As a college professor, I apologize profusely to the world in order to do that. You don't need to be bleeding edge technology in this area, though. This is tried and true stuff, and there's an awful lot of things that we know and understand, really good sets of conferences that we can go to, and in fact, quite a bit of academic research on whether or not joins and queries across multi-level type things are interesting. I heard a real interesting one recently, which was the idea that you just take all your legacy systems and you add to this the superstructure of common data elements to it, and now you can do queries across all of your legacy environment. Sounds like a wonderful thing, doesn't it? It's just a question of whether you can get that common set of metadata to work on it all the way at the top. Again, the other model here is preparation. We're getting ready to do some analysis, data analysis, which most people call analytics, but that's really what data analysis is. Start with the storytelling. What story are we trying to tell? And work backwards from that. Most people are like, I want a data warehouse. I want a dashboard. Well, those are fun, but what we really need to have is what are the business results that we need to have. Starting there is where we want to go to on there. And keep the improvements to it focused on strategy. Strategy is what's going to guide you when you're trying to make a decision in the face of uncertainty. And it's going to accrue to faster, better, cheaper, or less risk. There are no other categories to it. Private sector, public sector, doesn't matter. Those are the four that get to us. Lastly, we get to a set of best practices. There's absolutely no need to start from a blank sheet of paper. However, you will likely start from an existing set of systems that you have in there. Use some reverse engineering analysis. Most of our wonderful case tools, you can hook them up to the existing systems and pull in the data models that you have. Look at those data models, and that'll tell you a little bit about what sort of challenges you're having in the organization. The data model should reflect the strategy of the organization. If it doesn't, then we have a different situation here. And that's a wonderful area for you all as data professionals to demonstrate value. You can't use something that is not understood. And too many of these systems are just big black boxes with a bunch of stored procedures and things at the bottom that are, again, hidden things that are happening where we don't know what's actually happening. Over the years, I've gotten really disgruntled with consultants and methodologies. I think the word methodology actually means the study of methods, which is not terribly useful when you think about it from that perspective. So I like to use methods. And as far as I can tell, every method that I have encountered in my lifetime accrues to something very simple called plan, do, check, act, which is Deming's quality cycle. Iteratively refine each of your things that are going on. Look at what's happening. Think of it as approaching a cyclical process. Maybe you're doing 90-day sprint in an agile environment as you're working through these things. That gives you the opportunity to really make a difference in terms of what's going on there and looking at how these things go. So we're just about at our Q&A section. I'm going to finish up here with just a list of causes of data warehouse failures. I'm going to leave that with you to just take a look at in there. Again, you get all these slides at the end of the presentation here, of course, but I do want to finish out on one particular piece that I see happen over and over again, and that is the ubiquitous use case. This came to us through the object-oriented world. Use case defines what a user interacts with the system. It does not talk about what the system itself does. It talks about how the users interact with it. And that's an important but insufficient prerequisite in order to come up with it. So a registered user might edit an article at Wikipedia or something like that. But when I'm handed a pile of use cases that describe the data warehousing project that somebody wants to take a look at, the first thing I ask for is, where is your integrated glossary that has harmonized all the nouns and verbs that you've used across all these use cases? Because that's what was supposed to be in there. And I find it's true in exactly half of the cases. The other half of the cases do not have an integrated set of them, which means they're unable to go through and actually work these things in order to come up with them. Again, the average data warehouse is rebuilt 7 times before it's actually useful. It means if you only rebuild it 3 times, you are above average. We have a low standard in our environment, don't we? Yes, it's really kind of an interesting process. Well, I hope this has been interesting here. Again, I have to mention that we have next one up is data management best practices. It'll be on the 10th of December, and some of us will be in DC for the Data Governance and Information Quality East conference. And then we mark our 15th year together. Data strategy best practices back in January. I'd be remiss if I didn't put my publisher's link up there for books. And now we get to good old Q&A.
15 years, Peter. That like the webinar series can is old enough to legally drive a car in some jurisdictions.
That's hilarious.
That's stunning. There's a lot of fantastic conversation in chat that I think makes for some neat discussion that we could have, Peter. So I'm going to ask a couple questions from chat here. Um, considering that in general, the supply chain and its pillars are the last areas to receive IT and automation investment. What is the payback time for implementing systems in the cloud?
It's an interesting question. When you look at what the cloud is doing, it's allowing us to get access to data and to distribute it faster. And it's also relieving us from the burden of having to have on-prem hardware. But at the same time, we're also removing the data from direct control and placing it in a situation where oftentimes we're paying to access the data every time we access it. And sort of thinking about that from a value perspective, that may not necessarily be the most valuable piece. So there's certainly no global rules that I know of that say, it's always going to work in this circumstance and never going to work in this area. But what I find is that the data people that we have on these types of discussions are usually the ones that have had the cards already dealt, and now they're being told, you guys get to clean up the mess that's there. So what I would urge is if there's any sort of sense of planning, try to get ahead of both the RFP process and any sort of planning process, because the sooner you're inserting yourself into that, you can ask these questions. For example, you've got a great set of use cases there. Do you have a data dictionary that integrates all the nouns and verbs that are there? Because if not, how are we literally going to be singing off the same sheet of paper?
And then chat's getting excited about this a little bit. So would you say that cloud is best if used for archiving mostly? And
Well, certainly for keeping stuff cheap, but again, have you guys noticed that there's an inordinate number of data breaches that involve what's the star people that are doing all of this, and that's been involved in all the data breaches? Yeah, Snowflake. It's probably not their
yes.
fault, but gosh, their name seems to come out in the paper all the time on this. I don't know.
And kind of a similar vein here, my organization uses their ERP system to manage a large set of data related to parts. In my opinion, this leaves gaps in the integration process as well as makes data hard to analyze or access. Creating a warehouse to integrate with this data seems like a smart route to go to me. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, so the trick with ERPs is, of course, that you want to have as much leverage as you can and as little customization as you can. And if you're
Mhm.
using the ERP out of the box and it doesn't fill some of your needs, then yes, building some additional capabilities external to the ERP can often be a very good way of addressing that. But I have seen some people make their ERPs dance and sing and do all sorts of things and do really wonderful. Once again, it's going to go back to, what is it the organization wants to invest in? I saw a study recently that said the average ERP cost an organization $50,000 a year per user. Now, that's a huge number, and we would certainly have to have a very substantial value if you're going to be delivering that on top of it. How to make each one of us more $50,000 a year more productive? That's a pretty good value proposition if you can get to it. And again, we've seen because of all of the things that have happened over the years. Again, it's one of those other things. We believe that ERPs were going to be a silver bullet. We're going to solve all of our problems. Um, they have solved some problems. They have created another set of problems in there. So once again, back to the questioner, though, I think it's a really good question. You need to figure out what is the ERP doing or not doing that is going to help you manage that data better. And if there are things that are there, then what type of solution that might be the best particular piece.
That's a
Again,
that's a shocking number that you quoted, Peter. Like another $50,000 a year cost per user for your ERP.
yep, that's a
Yeah,
huge number.
your ERP better be a force multiplier then, in that two people can do the work of three, or else what are you doing?
Literally, you're absolutely right, Mark. That's the calculation for sure.
I do have some experience in that exact area, actually, which is one of the reasons why I was kind of gravitating towards that question. Um, And Peter, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. It's fine to have an ERP that meets all your needs, but their canned reporting solution is almost a separate question entirely. Do they do analytics out of the ERP generically that speak to how an organization wants to do their KPIs or OKRs? And if they don't, then you're kind of in warehouse land anyway.
I certainly agree with that. Anybody remember SAP BW?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was very unfortunate. They put out a data warehousing product that came with SAP that simply did not work, and everybody knew it, but people were still buying it and doing things with it and having to code around it in order to come up with that. So again, Mark, the question is dead on. If you have a set of capabilities, the better you're able to articulate those capabilities that you're needing through the use of a data model, right? That's really where you write it down on a map and say, look, we can't get this stuff to work because there's no connection between these two pieces of the data model. It's a really good way of doing it. And when the vendors come in and say, I've got a solution for you, you can say, great, express your solution in a language that I understand, which is the data model. Same thing if you're looking at buying package softwares. Package software is absolutely a good way to go in many instances. But if you can find a way of saying, by the way, it's considered best practice nowadays to ask the vendor for a logical data model of their product, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's software as a service or whatever it is that you're doing. They should provide that for you because it's some of the pieces you're trying to figure out whether their software will complement or conflict with the way your existing business practices are running.
It's an excellent point, Peter, especially in a world where some of these software as a service providers are graph databases behind the scenes. That makes things even a little bit more interesting.
It doesn't. Interesting. Just a quick point on the graph pieces. Um, One of the things that I have found over the years is that different managers like to communicate in different ways. And I worked for an individual at one organization for a full 2 years before somebody finally told me the individual was colorblind and didn't want to say anything about it. Okay, that's going to change the way in which I communicate with them. But in addition to that, the graph databases are something that a lot of people gravitate towards because to them it's closer to a dashboard. And again, it's not necessarily what graph databases are done, but they latch onto that aspect of it and oh, we should make this a graph database then, right? Maybe.
We have a couple of comments in Q&A that I'm going to merge into a single question here. It's shocking to know that building a data warehouse takes several iterations before getting it right. But then we also had somebody talk about Data Vault and how you presented the Data Vault as a starting block. Um, Data Vault skills are also very hard and expensive, and it also slows delivery time down in the short to medium term. And as somebody who's dabbled in Data Vault on occasion, I find this pretty interesting, actually, Peter. So, can you talk about a little bit about how Data Vault becomes that great initial design starting point and helps you launch that data warehouse, maybe without as many iterations as ye olden days would have have us grizzled veterans remember.
So I think, Mark, we lost you for a little bit of the audio there, but I think what you're asking is how do we justify the additional effort that it takes to get to a data vault for starting places? Is that fair
You
restatement
bet.
of the question?
Yep. Yep.
So I'm reminded of Tom DeMarco again. Some of you guys may have read his writings. It's certainly where I learned systems analysis and design skills from, where he was often asked, yeah, could you do it faster? And the answer is yes, I could do it faster, but if I do it faster, it will take longer. If I do it faster, it'll cost more. If I do it more, faster, it will deliver less product in the long run on this. So it is absolutely a step function in the data vault area. There's enough good books out there now that you can learn the theory behind data vault by just reading a single book. And I can make some recommendations, but then Lynn steals the sort of guidance on that. There's a lot of good work coming out of Germany and in Europe too on this. But that by taking that time and saying, yeah, maybe if I start off with a data vault, even then if I have to rebuild it 3 times, it's still cheaper than building it the faster way 7 times in order to come up with it. Because remember, our goal here is not, I've created a data warehouse, right? Yep, that and a cup of, a quarter will get you a cup of coffee, right? Students look at me like real strange when I say that. That's the idea that we're making data things happen. The question is, how long is it going to take me to the point where they're delivering organizational value? And that's really what we're trying to get to, is to say, what can we do so that when something happens over here at data, we're able to point to things that are happening in our organization and saying, that bump in sales you got last month? That was us, right? That decrease in the failed attempts to deliver digital targeted marketing ads to people who were trying to get them? That was us, right? These are the things that we're doing that are making a difference in there. It even goes down to the language that you use. Again, talk about data quality. I'm yawning, right? Could be wrong. Real important stuff. But if I'm talking about undeliverable ads, if I'm talking about the ability to get things right the first time instead of having to rebuild and iterate, and talking about the ability to have literally a common vocabulary for our warehouse before we go send out the RFPs and the vendors spend all the time responding to it. Yeah, that's a lot of savings that we can get in there. And I wouldn't talk about data quality. I'd talk about business value, given those two.
Well, I think we have one last discussion point here that we can have, Peter, and Sammy had posted in Q&A. Where does the data lakehouse fit into all of this?
So good question, Sammy. Actually, Bill Inman has written a wonderful book on the data lakehouse, and that's a place I would go to start if you wanted to learn more than just the short answer I'm going to give you here. But data lakes became popular around the time that Hadoop was going to solve all of our problems. Anybody remember that about 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Move everything to Hadoop. Again, Hadoop did represent a significant development in our capabilities, in the sense that we were now able to introduce parallelism into areas that we hadn't been able to do before. What data lakes are basically everything is indexed in the entire data warehouse. It's not just the keys, but we have literally everything indexed. If you ever worked in an object-oriented environment, I'm thinking of development platforms, sometimes the cold fusion environments were like that, and other things that were in there. That's got some advantages to do. But on the other hand, it's probably not the place that you want to have your reporting done out of, because everything is indexed means you have to access everything through an index. You can't retrieve a row at a time. You're going to be retrieving things in a much more granular fashion. Also, Hadoop was the prime example of you can't build in quality afterwards. Now, I'm not going to use the word quality there. Hadoop is actually still out there in some forms, but most of them have been replaced by Spark at this point. But Hadoop was never built with any sort of security features into it. And the problem with that is that many organizations had the snowflake oopsie where they had stuff out in Hadoop and people tried to put in stuff afterwards. This is actually, we're going to get into this afternoon a little bit. But the AI problem of you can't just build it so it's going to deliver something. You also have to make it so that it's industrial enough that you can use it and stand up to auditors and pass all your PII audits and all the rest of that sort of thing in there. So the lake house is a concept that says data lakes are a great place for landing data at the beginning. If I go back to the corporate information factory here that Claudia put together all those years ago, around on the left-hand side of this diagram, a lake house is oftentimes a very good place to do this, because when new things come along, it's easier to work with at first. But pretty soon what you do is you figure out, okay, now I know what type of data is coming in here and I know what to do with it, how to put it out there and put it into a data product, as we'd call it in today's environment, that's going to be actually useful for our users. Then that's sort of the transformation process. Very few organizations are using traditional data lakes. Most of them have transformed into sort of the data lake house kind of a process. And it's really much more of a semantic difference than it is technologically. You're bringing in things, you're understanding them a little bit more. And once you understand them, then you productionize them just the same way as normalization. We want to understand our data at the most granular level, but we don't want to put it in production that way. Things will never run. And again, sort of a silly statement, but I ran into an organization at one point in time in my career where their end of day job was running 48 hours. You guys are all laughing, right? That's sort of a non sequitur, but they simply couldn't keep up with the production there. It was not going to be useful. So great question, Mark. Thanks.
Well, and that's all the questions that we've got and comments in chat. So that's a good spot to wrap up for us for today. So just to remind everybody, we will be posting the recorded webinar and the slides to dataversity.net within a couple of business days, and we'll send a follow-up email to let you know the links to any other requested information. Thank you very much for this wonderful webinar today, Dr. Aiken.
Thank you, Mark. And just for everybody's information, there's a bunch of reference material here at the end of it that you get as well, part of the PDF. So when you get the PDF, go to the end and take a look. There's some really good stuff in there for you. See you guys next month.
Great. See you guys later.
And I'll see you in DC, Mark.
You betcha. And come
All
and
right.
say hi if you're coming to DC as well.
You bet. Take care.